Well, good afternoon to everybody and welcome to today's LUIS debates. I'm Andrea Prencipe, I'm the Rector of LUIS University, and I'm very pleased and in fact honored to offer the pretty brief introduction to today's debates. We are going to be discussing, together with the distinguished speakers, a very relevant issue, which is in the agenda of several governments today, which is the impact of research as far as policy is concerned. We all know that national governments, whenever it comes to funding research, they always ask what's for. So what are the benefits of pursuing research, especially in social sciences? And that's why we have involved today 4 distinguished social scientists. They come from the economics profession, from the management, and from the economics policy area to discuss about the extent to which and how researchers in social sciences in particular and the economic area, economic and management area can provide impact. Of course, policy is just one dimension of the impact that research can produce. A few months ago, together with colleagues from the Journal of Management Studies, fellow editors, we have tried to enlarge the meaning of impact of research. And of course, we identified different dimensions of impact. Was the policy one, the scholarly one, which is, say, the most typical, the practical one, the societal one, and the educational one. We shouldn't forget, in fact, that one key dimension of the impact of our research is also the research that goes into or goes through our students whenever they graduate and they go onto the job market. But today we're going to be focusing on the policy impact. And as it happens, LUIS is probably an appropriate kind of cradle to discuss about the impact of academic research. Since we were founded, we've always thought of research pursued at LUIS as being relevant and rigorous. So we do pursue research in and around relevant topics, of course, with academic rigor. And as a matter of fact, we try to depict, to define, to label the research that you produce here as actionable. As in fact, the payoff of LUIS is LUIS as actionable social sciences. So we'll try to see which is the perspective of our distinguished speakers today. I have the honor to introduce to you. I'll start with the fellow colleague who is the further away, Professor Igor Filatotchev from King's College London. Igor is a professor of corporate governance and is also the associate dean for international affairs at King's Business School. Hello, Igor is also associate to LUIS because he's a distinguished scholar at LUIS. Has got this important role within our academic community. To join the platform today is Professor also Fabiano Skivaldi, who is Deputy Rector for Research at LUIS. Fabiano is a Professor of Industrial Economics. To moderate this debate, we'll have Professor Rita Testa, who will soon leave the floor, and pretty soon Chiara Criscuolo from OECD will join the debate. So, Rita, the floor is yours, and thanks again to our guest speaker for today.
Thank you, Rector. First of all, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you all to this webinar session on the policy impact of research. I'm Rita Testa, Professor of Demography at LUIS University, deeply involved in research. So it is my big pleasure today to moderate the debate on impactful research. What is impactful research? Insightful, novel, original, interesting, catchy. These we will listen from our keynote speakers soon, Dr. Chiara Criscuolo from Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Professor Igor Filatotchev from King's Business School and King's College London, and Professor Fabiano Skivaldi from Lewis University. They are going to share with us the points of view on the essential features of high-impact research. I'm very enthusiastic to listen their thoughts on the main points research should meet to have an impact. And of course, not only in academia, but also on the society as a whole. Before leaving the floor to our first speaker, let me remind you that you will have the chance to ask questions by using the chat. Please stay engaged and ask questions, and please identify yourself before addressing a question. At the end of the three speakers' contribution, we will open a debate session based on your questions, comments, and remarks. And now I don't want to steal the time to our three keynote speakers, and I just want to introduce you Professor Igor Filatotchev. He is Professor of Corporate Governance and Strategy at King's Business School, King's College London, and a visiting professor at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. He received his PhD in economics from the Institute of World Economy and International Relations, Moscow. His research interests are focused on corporate governance effects on entrepreneurship and strategic decisions, sociology of capital markets. He has published more than 150 academic papers in the fields of corporate governance and strategy, including publication in leading academic journals such as Academy of Management Journal, Strategic Management Journal, Journal of International Business Studies, Organization Science, and Journal of Management. He served as an editor in Journal of Management Studies, Corporate Governance International Review, and Journal of Management and Governance. Currently, he is senior editor of Oxford Research Encyclopedia of Business and Management. And now, Professor Filatotchev, the floor is yours. 10 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Rita, Professor Prencipe, thank you very much for your kind introduction and for your kind invitation. And I would like to extend my warm welcome to the audience. I hope that everybody who joined this webinar is well and safe in these challenging times. And thank you for providing an opportunity to share some of my thoughts regarding the impact of academic research, with a particular focus on an area I feel passionate about, the field of corporate governance and strategic management. I would like to share a very short deck of slides, which will help me to navigate through my presentation. And again. I think I'm experiencing a slight technical problem. So in this case, I will just continue with my presentation. Indeed, in the recent publication of editors of Journal of Management Studies in the Financial Times, they very clearly pointed out that it's very important for academic research to engage with a wider academic community, as well as policymakers and political and organizational structures which are in charge of the policy process in different fields. However, there are some very significant barriers towards this engagement And as Professor Prencipe pointed out quite rightly, it's not happening as a kind of given outcome of academic research. What are these barriers? Well, first of all, the overarching focus on theory development and theoretical contributions, which very often detract attention of researchers from practical relevance of their studies and their analysis, their theoretical inferences. Some researchers pointing out to a growing gap between theory development in various fields of management, economics, and finance, and global problems which the societies around the world are dealing as we speak, such as COVID-19 pandemics, the global climate change, problems with migration. Very rarely they find reflection in research in corporate, in strategic management, corporate governance field. The research relies very heavily on established theoretical frameworks, such as resource-based view, agency theory, assuming almost universal application of these theoretical models and theoretical developments, regardless the specific context in a particular country or around particular organization. So as you can see, there are some significant problems with translating academic research into policy recommendations to make sure that there will be a significant policy impact. If we could move to the next slide, please. However, there are examples when policy impact and the transfer of academic thinking into policy research has been successful. And if I refer to my own field of research, corporate governance, academics recently challenged the overarching dominance of a shareholder supremacy framework, which was underpinning corporate governance research for last few decades. Some theories suggested a development of open system corporate governance theories with a formal recognition of institutional, social, and political differences between national economic systems in different countries. And this research did have a significant policy impact. For example, the introduction of a new organizational form, companies which combine purpose with profit principles in their operations, enterprises and mission. The development of corporate governance consultation in the UK recently, which takes into account the stakeholder perspective and a need to recognize the wider interest of stakeholders besides just focusing on shareholders is featured prominently in this consultation document. So these are kind of examples how fundamental academic research could be translated in policy initiatives, not only in a particular country, but around the world. So how can we facilitate this connection between fundamental research and policy agenda in different countries? Next slide, please, if I may. First of all, I want to emphasize that research rigor and solid theory underpinnings really continue to be a necessary precondition for a policy impact, because they give academic research a certain credibility or legitimacy, if you want, among final research users. But what is very important is to engage the users of academic research, not only at the stage of dissemination of research findings, but also at the stage of inception of individual research projects, when academic ideas are taking shape and form and being engaged in the whole process of academic research will provide a connection between academics, research institutions, universities, business schools, and their final users, including policymakers. We engage with a very specific cohort of our society, our students, in particular our MBA students, participants in our executive education programs. And very often, a significant part of this cohort will embark on various business and policy-making careers. So engaging with these individuals at early stages of their career, explaining them the relevance of academic research is another important channel providing a policy impact of our fundamental studies. And I want to conclude it with words of warning. We should be cognizant that there is a significant difference between policy impact of research or policy impactful research and impact on research of political pressures and interests. And we could see around the world that there is evidence that different political interests are trying to provide influence not only on the way we do research, but also research output, research outcomes. So maintaining objectivity, and as I said a minute ago, research rigor is a very important precondition to make sure that this impact is happening. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll be very glad to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Professor Filatotchev. Let me say that this was really a very inspiring talk, and I have noted several questions, but we will have time at the end of this debate. Now, let me say welcome to our third speaker, Chiara Criscuolo. And Chiara joined the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in 2009. She heads the Productivity, Innovation and Entrepreneurship Division in the Directorate for Science, Technology and Innovation at the OECD. Her research on innovation, business dynamics, productivity, policy evaluation, and international trade has been extensively published in leading academic journals, including the American Economic Review, the Review of Economics and Statistics, and the Journal of International Economics. Chiara is currently a research associate at the Center for Economic Performance at the London School of Economics, where she was a research fellow before joining the OECD. She holds a doctoral degree in economics from University College London and held academic appointments at University of Siena, City University and University of Cambridge, in addition to the London School of Economics, ahead of joining the OECD. And now, Chiara, I want to leave the floors to you for your contribution. I'm very curious to listen to your talk. 10 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Thank you very much for having me in this interesting panel. And let me start by saying that my talk is going to be quite complementary to the one of the previous speaker. And perhaps let me start with what might seem like an obvious point, which I think it's quite important to explain, the nature of my intervention. In particular, one important point that needs to be taken into account when we discuss the policy impact of research, that this is very much multidimensional in terms of areas of research, types of impact, channels, and also methods that can be used for research to have an impact on policy. Obviously, in 10 minutes, I'm not going to be exhaustive, and I will only focus on a couple of them. I will also start by focusing on the policy impact of research activity in the field of economics, because that's probably what is closest to my everyday job and to my personal experience. But if I may, and I have time at the end, I will also touch upon two more channels through which research can impact policy. In particular, scientific advice to policy making in general, and also during crisis. In particular, we have just lived, or we are still living through the COVID crisis. So I think this is an important point, as you know, this is a crisis with some international dimension to it. And then, if I have time to conclude, touching upon the activities of research and technology organizations, which are playing an important role in the whole ecosystem of mission-oriented policies, which is something that the OECD, and in particular our director, the Science, Technology and Innovation Directorate at the OECD, is doing a lot of work. So let me start by stressing, four ways in which economic research can impact policies, and some of them have been touched upon by the previous speaker. First of all, we expect basic research and research in academia to really make the fundamental advances in theory, and I'm thinking especially in terms of economics in new models and new methodology, for example, new econometric estimators or new use of new methodology from other scientific areas, for example, data science and more generally statistics as well. And then the second area where academia has really pushed, I would say, the frontier is really the collection and the analysis of new data sources. And what is interesting here, I think, is, for example, during the COVID crisis, for done academic institution, for example, the LSE in the UK, statistical offices, but also the Confederation of Businesses, that new timely data was collected during COVID, for example, on telework, on technology adoption, and so on. And this is really answering to some of the need of evidence in a timely manner by government efforts. Channels that the third channel.
Chiara, sorry if I interrupt you. We can just listen you in a very fragmented way. Perhaps it might help to switch off your camera so that we could at least catch your talk. All right.
Sorry, can you hear me better now? Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
I'm having some problems with my connection. It never happens. And then today it was a bad day. So, I was saying collecting new data sources to create this sort of evidence base for policy making, and then, as Professor Alicek said before, training and mobility, I would say, also across governments and institutions. Obviously, and this is, I think, where policy and institution can make a lot. These different tools require the existence of the right incentive structures for academic have to devote time and efforts to this connection and this sort of efforts to policy making, which is not yet, I would say, that widespread across different institutions, where most of the academic career is still very much based on publication in top journals and not so much on policy impact. That said, I think there are more and more funding agencies that do require evidence of policy impact. So I think this is a good way forward. I don't know if you can hear me well or not. I hope you do.
Yes, we can.
Can you hear?
We hear some noise, but we can hear you well. Chiara, we have lost you. Can you hear us? I'm afraid that we have to, let's wait a couple of seconds if Chiara can connect again. I think the connection was lost, and now I see again the box. Chiara, can you hear me? Are you still with us? Apologize for this inconvenience. Is the
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can.
Yeah, sorry, I lost you. I lost you for a moment. So we were talking about the importance of the incentive structure for academics, which I think is something that policy and academic institutions and the academic community can do much more, so that the efforts that academics make to really contribute to shaping policy and to provide evidence to policy can be improved. And finally, one area where, again, I think more can be done by both governments and the academic community is really enhancing multidisciplinarity, which I think is particularly important in many areas of policies. And very recently also on this mission-oriented policy, where economics with other scientific fields could really contribute to shaping policy, but also to design new ways of evaluating mission-oriented policy strategies, which is something that I think there is still a lot of work that needs to be done to really understand how to evaluate, especially innovation policies that operate in a high uncertainty environment and with long-term broad sort of goals. Let me conclude, because I know that that this is not the way of participating in a panel, but let me perhaps say that one of the main channels in which research can impact policy is really to scientific advice, to policy making, and to the formulation of decisions of government. And for these decisions, for example, in the case of COVID, on all the lockdown measures, the vaccination strategy, governments really required or are still requiring scientific evidence, from both a long-term policy development, but also this urgent crisis management that we are seeing today. And one important where I think it's this has been evidence is not only in the preparedness and the recovery phase, but also the
I'm afraid we have again lost you, Chiara. Well, since Chiara was, I think we can continue, because well, she was just on the conclusion. I want to say thanks to Chiara for this overview based on the four fundamental features of impactful research. Time is running, so we have to move to the next speaker, Professor Fabiano Skivaldi, professor of economics at Lewis University, where he is also vice rector for research. He is a research fellow at Einaudi Institute for Economics and Finance and Center for Economic Policy Research. His main areas of interest are industry dynamics, productivity, and entrepreneurship. In 2019, he was awarded an ERC Advanced Grant. The project proposal had the title Industrial Structure and the European Productivity Growth Divergence. He obtained his BA at Bocconi University and his PhD in economics at Stanford University. He has consulted for the European Union, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Italy, and the Italian government. His work has been published in leading academic journals, among which the Journal of Political Economy, the American Economic Review, the Review of Economic Studies, the Review of Financial Studies, the RAND, the Journal of the European Economic Association. And now, please, Professor Skivaldi, the floor is yours, 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Maria Rita, and thanks everybody for participating in this debate and also for listening to it, and I'm looking forward to any question that would come. So I'm actually gonna have a little bit of a different perspective, just to have a little bit of debate from Igor and Chiara. And so I think, as both said, there is a lot of push nowadays for relevance of academic research. So let me say, first of all, after my PhD, I worked for 8 years in the research department of a central bank. And the research department of a central bank is a place where research is very policy oriented. There are a series of policy questions that need to be answered also through research. And so, I have an experience in doing policy oriented research. And I think, even nowadays, I mostly spend my time trying to publish in top journals, but eventually I try to connect the dots across all the papers that I write and come up with a vision that can somehow, be shared with the community at large on policy conclusions, policy advices. So I'm not a person who lives in the ivory tower, but maybe exactly for that, I think I have the right to say that I think that this strong push towards, policy relevance can be a little bit too strong. Why do I mean that? I mean that because in general, the history of mankind shows us that progress comes a lot from basic research. And basic research has some characteristics that make it impossible to be done in, say, private institutions, right? Developing a vaccine can be done by, pharmaceutical companies, but maybe, scanning just the, whatever, some more basic breakthrough, they typically come from academic research, where the main motivation is not, policy relevance, but is actually intellectual curiosity. And this is very much also the approach that I take as a prorector at Lewis. In my 3 years of prorectorship, I've always pushed for rigor and intellectual curiosity being the drivers of what we do. And of course, then we do have a a duty towards society to disseminate our work, to make it as clear as possible, to do all the efforts we can to make sure that if there's something useful in it, maybe hidden between equations and complicated estimation techniques, that can be actually brought up to light and shared with the more general, policy public. But still, I do believe that the first driver of what we do in academia should be academic curiosity. And I'm never going to tell a colleague, you should stop doing theory because I can't see an immediate, policy use of what you're doing, because, maybe it will be useful, maybe not, but many of the breakthroughs that has led us to where we are were actually done, I think most of them probably, just out of the intellectual curiosity of the ones who did them and not because they were thought to solve an actual problem. These things will come, of course, because then the markets will provide incentives for people to actually use these breakthroughs to have a policy impact. But the markets or the institutions that have in their mandate to do some policy, to follow some policy goals, will actually use them. but I do believe that we shouldn't push too much. We shouldn't be too apologetic about being driven by intellectual curiosity. If you read Bertolt Brecht's Life of Galileo, at some point Galileo goes back to doing some research that he had stopped because of some political problem with the church. And when they ask him, why do you do that? That's kind of a, dangerous, and there are other things that you can actually study. And Brecht makes his Galileo say, because I want to understand. I want to understand. I have a problem in mind. There's something that I really want to crack, and that is what really, pushes me. And doing research can really be, tiring, difficult, and it really requires a drive that sometimes comes from, curiosity. And I think that's what is the first driver of what we do, and it should remain. Okay. Does it mean that we shouldn't have an impact, or that we don't have an impact enough? It's hard to tell. Of course, it's hard to have a counterfactual, but I would say again, Igor was saying that there is a disconnect. I'm not so sure. If I look at for example, at this recent COVID crisis, I was curious. Like, publishing times in academia are like 5 years. Okay. And when the crisis erupted, it really moved by the day. Last March of 2020, every day there was something new. And I thought, as academics, we'll never be able to respond to the speed of this crisis. We will be we will always be behind the curve. In economics, at least, right? In other sciences, we are faster. But I'm saying economics, it's like 5 years from the moment you have an idea to the moment an editor tells you your paper has been published. Actually, that I was wrong. Actually, a month later, papers started to come out, and papers have kept flowing at an incredible pace throughout the crisis. And even now, the Center for Economic Policy Research published like a sort of a specific working paper series, sort of a journal, COVID vetted papers in economics. It still comes out twice a week with 5 or 6 papers in each number. So I think, as academics, we do want to be relevant. Maybe a few guys just care about whatever, a problem. But most of the people do want to speak to the rest of the world. So I think the incentives are there, and the recent experience would tell us that we do respond to these incentives, because I wasn't expecting such a fast and very large response to the crisis that, it was a big crisis, and I think the response was big too. And quick. So, and of course, then, what policymakers can do to shift our attention toward policy relevant goals, they should do what they do. They actually give grants to direct research. At that point, you say you're very interested in sustainability, and actually most of the grants now, many of the grants, I wouldn't say most, but many of the grants now around the world are for sustainability-driven focused projects. And I think, again, people respond because having money, it's useful, it helps you doing research. And if you are at the margin between studying, I don't know, the optimal balance of power between shareholders and debt holders, or funding schemes that take into account sustainability issues, putting grants up is going to help to shift the balance towards what policymakers think is the most policy relevant issue at the moment. So I think, we should be driven by intellectual curiosity. We are still, I think most of the people, most of the researchers, even academic researchers, are interested in having a policy impact, and policymakers can influence our choices by putting money, grants money towards projects that address the societal challenges. So last thing I want to say, I would actually want to say something about more than the policy impact of researcher. I would like to say something about the policy impact of research. I would like to say something about the policy impact of researcher, where with the policy impact of researcher, I mean the policy impact that the mindset of the research can have when talking about policy problems. And this comes basically from my experience. I've been involved and still I am in policy questions, and what I learned by interacting with policymakers that are not researchers is that the difference between a researcher and somebody who's not a researcher as training is that when I, as a researcher, think about a problem, I always have an approach that asks, what is the exact question? What is the goal? What is the best way to get there? And then what are the constraints? I always start from the big picture. I try to come up with some general principles to guide me towards addressing the policy question. And then from that, I use my knowledge of research to try and understand what's the best strategy is to get where we want to get. While when typically people that don't have this type of training, they tend to start from more, for example, I don't know, the low details, what has been done in the past, and they tend to address problems one by one rather than having a general rule. Just to give you an example of what I'm talking about.
Sorry, Professor Skivaldi, if you can come to the conclusion so that we have enough time. Thank you.
Sure, I'll finish. So and this is it. A few years ago, I was part of a group that had to reform the incentives, the incentive system for firms. Policymakers were saying, let's look at it one by one, and they were hundreds, right? While I was saying, let's just use a concept of market failure, which is a general concept in economics, and that makes your life much easier, and I think your work much more purposeful. That's it.
Thank you, Professor Skivaldi, for this very insightful contribution on impactful research. I have seen that we have already received some questions from the audience, and there is a question for all three of you. Can the impact of research help fight the spread of fake news? I don't know who wants to answer this question or
I mean, I don't know, but perhaps let me mention that I think if we have greater understanding and trust between the providers and the users of scientific advice, both at the national but also at the international level, I think that could help. And I think this could really be achieved with more regular interaction, not just in the period of crisis and for example, creating regular drills and regular sort of exchanges where the communication of the scientific advice is part of a broader communication strategy of governments. I think that could be very important with the use as well of usual social media and online tools. So I think this could be quite important, beyond just the crisis period, because I think that's the problem. If we only have this communication during crisis, I think it undermines a bit the purpose.
Sure. Thank you, Chiara. I have a related issue that I want to address to Professor Filatotchev. You nicely framed this trade-off between theory and relevance. I want to address another trade-off between the research being timely and the research being of quality. How would you face this trade-off? Because on one side, there is an urgency that motivates us to do research. On the other side, and we have seen in the time of COVID, there is also kind of rigor to be maintained in our research.
Thank you. That's a very interesting question, and in a way, it's also linked to what Fabiano was talking about. The curiosity-driven research and research which is guided by some urgent needs of the government, of the society at large, and how would you deal with time to speed to market, so to speak, of research findings. I remember at the early stages of my career, I started when in a period when Eastern Europe, former Soviet Union, were embarking on a process of economic reforms through mass privatization, through liberalization of national economies. And the economists, management scholars at the time knew very little about this context, this new emerging developments. I remember how hungry academic journals were for some evidence base of some papers which could explain what is going on in this very particular context. That's how the whole field of economics of transition has emerged about 30 years back. First papers, including my own, in a field, sometimes if you look at them now, seem to be a bit naive, a bit underdeveloped according to current standards. But I think they made a very important contribution to general understanding and evolution of the field of transition economies. Now, of course, if you look at more mature publications, their evidence-based would be much broader, theoretical frameworks much more developed. So I think it's a natural process of a field development. At early stages, you might have papers which are very much context-driven. But then when the field kind of cements itself, we could see how academic rigor kicks in. And because of that, it takes a bit longer to develop papers. And I agree with Fabiano, the editorial process in the top journals is pretty much, stretched out in terms of time and effort required to publish a good paper. So I don't know if it answers your question, but that's my view on that.
Yes. Thank you. We have got a couple of questions from the audience. Valerio, in which sector can innovation facilitate the impact of research the most? Who does want to answer, Valerio? Yes, please, go ahead, Professor Skivaldi.
I guess we go in rounds. Okay. Well, I would say that the impact of research is larger in sectors that have inherent higher innovation content, right? Typically, tech universities are very often close to tech clusters. Stanford with Silicon Valley, or MIT with whatever, the Cambridge tech cluster. So of course, the higher the innovation content of the sector, the more they have to deal with research. And I think again there is this possibly fruitful interplay between more, say, academic and intellectually driven, curiosity-driven research on one side, but then that can very quickly become actionable and marketable. But this is done by companies, and so I think universities have spent a lot of effort in making sure that it's easier for researchers to bring their breakthroughs to the market.
Thank you, Professor. And now a question from Luca. How can a company take advantage of its research department in order to have a social impact? Who of you wants to give a feedback to Luca?
But perhaps if we take it from the social development goal perspective, I think it can do so in several ways. First of all, it's already by, one of the social development goals, for example, is equality between women and men. So trying already to have an environment that is more inclusive within the research department and sort of encourage the career of women within the research department. That could be one. The second one is through also the activity. I mean, it will depend on the activity of the company. Other social development goals are, for example, clean water, food access to all, decrease poverty. So it really, depends on where the company is active, but for sure, working on such activity or in such areas could be one way of having social impact. But I let the others add to this. But I think thinking also of the way the research departments are organized, I think is an important aspect to this.
Thank you, Chiara. Yes, please, Professor. Very shortly, because
I think it's very important. It's very important question. Very often, if you look at management theory, such as research on innovation, for example, or strategic management research focused on innovation and product development, it has considered R&D efforts as an efficiency tool, something which is used by companies to modernize their maybe production processes, to introduce new products, to improve their market position, which eventually will lead to some tangible financial outcomes. I think this view is shifting now very rapidly, and some researchers strongly pointing out to social consequences of innovation. Let's look at introduction of artificial intelligence. This is a technology, and a lame person would say, what is to do with social order? But we know that very often introduction of new AI systems, big data analytics, and other forms of digital revolution lead to significant changes in business models, which become more capital intensive or rather labor intensive. And some sectors and jobs in these sectors are being rapidly replaced. So there are very significant social consequences to these modern forms of innovation. And that should be seriously considered by many companies who are trying to keep the competitive edge with regard to their market position, but also should be cognizant of possible social effects, which could be associated with different forms of innovation.
Thank you, Professor. You want to add anything, Professor Skivaldi? No. No.
I'm fine. I think we're running.
Okay. So I'm afraid we are already running out of time. So thank you for your contribution, and thank you to the publicum that stay engaged. And the open question will be for all of us as professor, how we could engage our students in doing research, in motivating doing research, possibly also path-breaking or cutting-edge research. And now I hand over to our rector for the concluding remarks. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Maria Rita, and thanks to all the three speakers that have really fascinated our audience with their perspective on what we can do about what we mean basically about impactful research. Of course, there's no intention on my side, from my side, to offer a synthesis of what has been said so far. But I think there are a couple of issues that do resonate. That did resonate during this interesting debate. The first is what Igor was mentioning regarding the difference between the impact of research, social science research in particular, but the impact for research, or the extent to which research can have an impact for policy issues, as opposed to the impact of political issues on research, which is kind of, the reverse, which is not particularly probably appropriate, or is not, should be not particularly relevant in a way. So I guess that the take here, at least my take, is that we should pay attention to this, what they may seem slight differences, but they are particularly important, because one thing is to say that we, as Maria Rita was saying, we encourage researchers to address important political issues, of course, with an academic rigor. And the different thing is the extent to which political issues can influence research, which are totally different issues. I appreciated the contribution from Chiara, who underlined the importance of setting up incentives, appropriate incentives especially for young researchers to pursue, say, policy-oriented research or research which does have practical impact. And I also appreciate the perspective that Fabiano has put forward, arguing for a more kind of speculative research. Nonetheless, he did underline when he rejoined the debate on the importance of the interplay between academic research and research that should be pursued within corporations. So in a way, I think one of the important takeaway from today's debate is that the policy impact of research is very much an open issue. Of course, we did not want to close the debate at all. It is very much open. It should be open because I think that when it comes to a phenomenon that we like to call knowledge, and we pursue research on knowledge to produce new knowledge. By definition, we consider, we try to say manage a pretty much dynamic phenomenon, which cannot and should not be somehow confined in a specific frame. So let's continue our conversation, let's continue our debate, and let's keep the knowledge phenomenon and the actors that produce new knowledge have the freedom to pursue the direction that they are supposed to. So thanks a lot to all our speakers. Thank to Maria Rita for a moderating role, and to our audience for asking very interesting questions. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you for the next debate. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.